Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, or guten Tag, as we would say in Germany. Thank you for coming. We're going to talk today about German manufacturers. And I guess I'll start by summing up a little bit of the history behind Glashütte, the city of Glashütte, which is what we're actually here to talk about this afternoon, boy. So what I guess I wanted to start saying is that Switzerland is not alone in manufacturing fine watches. You being English, I'm sure that you're aware that England has a long history of watch manufacture, and so does Germany. In fact, it's longer. Germany, like England, is one of the historical centers of fine watchmaking, thanks in great part to a small city by the name of Glashütte. Let's take a closer look at the history of the region. In 1845, Ferdinand Adolf Lange, who was a watchmaker to the Saxon royal court in Dresden, founded not only Lange & Söhne, but also the entire watchmaking industry in the region. His idea was mainly to use local talent to produce very good quality wristwatches. Sorry, pocket watches. I think that was a force of habit. The novelty of his adventure and the way he went about it attracted a lot of other talents to the town and its surroundings, such as Moritz Grossmann and others of now historically sound names. Thus, an industry was set up and a whole supplier system evolved, as well as other brands and other makers of fine watches. Nomos arrived in the scene in the early 1900s, but that was a short-lived venture, disappeared again, only to come back later, but only in name, in the 1990s. Glashütte enjoyed an excellent global reputation for fine and reliable watches, pocket watches mainly, and in its heyday, it boasted an entire industry the city boasted an entire industry comprising watch and clock companies, suppliers, individual artisans, and even related industries. Just like any Swiss metropolis today, La Chaux-de-Fonds, Le Loc, Glashütte was the same, basically. This was all to change with World War II. At the end of the war, Russian invaders dismantled the factories and sent intellectual property and other properties to Moscow. The Saxon city fell into the Russian zone when Germany was divided into 4 zones after the war, which was governed by a communist government. This government put all of Glashütte's entire industry into one big conglomeration. Ended up being Glashütte Ohrenbetrieb, which is now today Glashütte Original, the remains of this. Each individual company ceased to exist for 40 years during this time. So fast forward to the fall of the Berlin Wall, 40 years later. New opportunities arose for East Germany and Glashütte, and all of the historical names at home there. Nomos was pretty much the first to seize the opportunity. A businessman by the name of Roland Schwertner decided to revive the name, but only the name. It had nothing to do with the previous incarnation of Nomos. And he came in and decided to make beautiful watches, which you can probably see some up on the screen. And Walter Lange, great-grandson of Ferdinand Adolf Lange, also revived Lange & Söhne. The evolution of both of these brands in the past 20 years has been nothing short of awe-inspiring. It surpasses any other history in the history of watchmaking, in my opinion. Nomos began its modern incarnation by using the extra flat Peugeot movement, which is now part of the ETA, under the ETA, roof of ETA, the extra flat Peugeot 7001. This allowed the company to pursue Bauhaus-inspired flat watches that are very design-oriented, form follows function, very beautiful classical timeless watches, without bringing the case or any other of the design elements out of proportion. Nomos now manufactures between 75 and 95% of its own calibers, does no longer use the Peugeot caliber. Lange picked up where it left off in the 1950s and began manufacturing its own manufacture movements after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Both companies have increased in production depth over the years. Nomos can now boast 7 calibers. 7 calibers, manufacture movements, and has 90 employees, 90, more or less. Lange also increased production depth over the years, even makes its own balance springs in the meantime, as well as balance springs for other Richemont company group brands. There are more than 450 employees employed by Lange & Söhne, and has made a total of 40 calibers throughout this 20-year history, 28 of which are still in current production. The future is very bright for Glashütte. More companies continue to set up business there, and the established ones continue to expand. Nomos expanding into Britain last year. Lange has been in Britain for quite a while already, since 1996. And I would dare say that German watchmaking is not only back where it once was, it has, in my opinion, perhaps surpassed historical role models in terms of depth, quality, and creativity. And today we'd like to talk with some representatives from these two companies. For Nomos, we have Christoph Niesert, who is the technical director. And for Lange, we have Arndt Einhorn, head of communications for Lange & Söhne. So I have prepared a few questions. We're going to do sort of a panel discussion and then for about 20 minutes. And then I thought maybe we could have questions from the audience after that, if that's good. So Christoph. What does the geographical location Glashütte mean for your company? In other words, could you set up business elsewhere in Europe or Germany and still have the same level of success?
Yeah, Glashütte means for us that we have the chance to have our colleagues, our watchmakers, they are really highly educated, so they have the know-how and the experience to make fine watches. In Glashütte we have at the moment 4 watchmaking schools. So we have huge amount of employees that can work for us, for the watchmaking companies which are in Glashütte. So on the other hand, we have a certain supplier structure, so we can use this structure from supplying companies, giving us raw material or other parts for the watches. So at the moment, I think Glashütte is really the right location to make these fine watches for us. On the other hand, there's also a tradition. So even you talked about Switzerland, so Le Locle or La Chaux-de-Fonds. We also have this tradition that there are family structures. Even the father or the grandfather was working for Lange or other companies. So they have this experience given to their children, and they are working for us too. And on this hand, the tradition of Glashütte and also for the watchmaking companies is really a heritage for us.
Arndt, what about Lange & Söhne? It seems to me that Lange and Glashütte are inseparable. How do you see that? Now Lange is part of the Richemont Group. It was taken over in the year 2000. Does Glashütte continue to be a very important place for the brand?
Definitely, Glashütte is our home. It is the place where the brand has been created, first of all, 166 years ago now, and secondly, 21 years ago after the wall came down. So Glashütte is a place where we see our culture, where we see our roots, where we have, let's say, the highly qualified watchmakers, or the competence of watchmaking which we find in the city. And well, the roots of Lange date back to Dresden. It's not only Glashütte in the region, because the first founder was a watchmaker at the court, a royal watchmaker at the court of Dresden. So he moved to Glashütte, and I think the whole region is very important. It's not only the city of Glashütte, it's I would say even Saxony as one of the German states, which is our home and where almost all of our people are coming from.
Let's move to a different topic briefly. Arndt, the subject of manufacture movements is sort of a debatable or debated, hotly debated question in the area of fine watchmaking. For you or for Lange & Söhne, what constitutes a manufacture movement?
Well, the difficulty is that there's no clear definition of a word manufacturing, and I think it's defined by different brands in a different way. For Lange, manufacturing or manufacture means, first of all, that there's a very high level of vertical integration of production depth. So, which not only applies in a way how we produce our parts, our components, but it starts first of all with a development, and as you have mentioned before, it has been 40 different movements since 1990, since the comeback. And I think you are familiar with the development of mechanical timepieces, so it takes several years depending on the complication. And if it is a highly complicated timepiece, like many of within our collection, it can take up to 5 years or longer. So, and with multiplied by 40, that shows many things go in parallel. That's why it's not hundreds of years, it's only 21. But that means how time-absorbing and also costly this process is. And manufacturing goes further, of course, in the production of components, so blank parts. In the current production, we have for time being 28 different movements. And if you think about the number of parts in each movement, which is from 160, around 160 in a plain watch, in a plain 3-hand watch at Lange, in the Saxonia hand winding, and it goes up to more than 1,000 in one of our most complicated, with a little trick, there's a fusee and chain mechanism. I don't know if you are familiar with that, and the chain alone consists of more than 600 parts. But in a really complicated movement, 600 to 800 parts. That means that the total production in our blank part manufacturing is between 3,500 and 4,000 different components. So this means manufacturing, if for a small company like Lange, we do a very exclusive number of pieces only, very few thousand pieces a year, but we have almost 4,000 different components for the different movements. So which shows what manufacturing means in our opinion, and it goes further at Lange that it's not only the components, but we have a certain philosophy that we develop and produce a movement for one particular model also. That means that a model is not using movements from other models, but we try to do it as individual as possible.
How many base calibers or base movements are there? You just said you try to change them around, but there have to be certain bases.
That's very true. So if we look into families and we try to categorize our whole collection into categories, it's 5 main families which we have. And within that main families, there might be different basic movements, but I would say the number of basic movements within Lange is around 10. And from that basic movements, we, of course, if we have another complication, another feature coming from the Lange 1, we have a Lange 1 time zone, we have a Lange 1 tourbillon. So basically we have some parts which are used in all the models, but it depends always on the complication, if something completely new has to be developed or if we can use a basic movement and we just further develop and add additional parts, or we have different parts which will be included in the existing movement.
And just curiously, something very spectacular like the Lange 31, which has 31 days of power reserve, where did that begin? Is there a base movement or was that a fresh development?
In this example, it was so much different that definitely there was the necessity of having a completely new developed movement. 31 days power reserve, which was quite a challenge, means, of course, a very long mainspring inside, whereas even 2 mainsprings in 2 barrels stacked on each other. And each of the mainsprings has a length of 1.85 meters, so it makes 3.70 meters of mainspring length within a wristwatch, so quite impressive. And well, the long duration, that means the long power reserve is one challenge, but there was a second challenge which is, I would say, even more difficult to solve, because the enormous power from that mainsprings had to be released in a controlled manner. And it's so much power that normally a watch would not run without a constant force device, which we needed to integrate also. And if you look into the movement, which is quite a big watch, definitely, because it contains a lot of well, mainspring, but all other parts too. Within the watch, where is that constant force device, which all 10 seconds gives a little impulse into the escapement, and so we can, over the whole running time of 31 days, control and guarantee a very constant rate accuracy.
Hard to follow that. Christoph, I'd like to ask you that same question. For Nomos, what constitutes a manufacturer movement, particularly when you take into consideration that Nomos began using the base Peugeot 7001, and now you've moved on to your own calibers?
We started in 1992, and the way to become a manufacturer it's quite long, because 7 years after that, in 1997, we started with this first complication. It's a second stop. So if you pull the crone, the balance spring is not working anymore. So that was the first complication. But since that, we were not manufacturer. In 2005, we became manufacturer because we invited the automatic movement. So that was really the first step. Even the power reserve or the date mechanism was not enough just to implement in the basis caliber to become manufacturer. So the way was long, but as we started in 1992 with 3 members or 3 colleagues in an apartment without telephone connection, it's quite impressive to become manufacturer 15 years after that. So since 2005 we are manufacturer. That's caliber epsilon and xi. Epsilon and zeta with date mechanism, and since 2010 it's caliber xi with the GMT module. So in that time I began working for Nomos. It was clear that we are manufacturer, because for that caliber we had around 30 new pieces, and we decided what to do with them. And it was clear we had a turning department, we had a milling department, and so on. And we had this know-how at this time to make all those parts ourselves. So there was no supplying structure for the movement. We did everything ourselves.
Christoph, and I'd also like to ask you about the quality designation made in Glashütte and how it may or may not compare with made in Switzerland, Swiss made, and how the companies who are at home in Glashütte feel about this designation.
Yeah, if you talk about those labels, it's clear, even made in Germany, made in Glashütte, it's a promise for the customer. So in Glashütte, there's this rule that 50% of the movement value added should be done in Glashütte. So might be decoration, but for us it's also vertical integration, as my colleague from Lange & Sons told us. So we are doing ourselves parts to reach these 50%, but for most of our movements we are above this 50%. So there's not really a space to it that we reached just 51%. We are above these 50, about, I don't know, 70 or 80%, depends on the caliber. For us, it's really important to be independent and to make this quality work in the movement, so that we can decide what tolerances we need, what kind of surfaces we need, so that we can influence the quality of the movement, and that's our promise for the customer.
And how does Lange & Söhne feel about made in Glashütte?
Well, first of all, it's made in Germany, definitely, when we bring it down to made in Saxony. And lately, I mean, the location is Glashütte, and which is where we are all producing, not only the 2 brands who are represented here, but there's a few others as well. And well, this is the traditional place where watchmaking has been developing in that part of Germany since a very long time, and that's why I mean, for Langeware it's not so much I would say need discussing the amount of in-house production. So I think this is not a question which we need to answer. So the vertical integration is quite high, but I think it is important that we have some rules defined for the region, for the city, and this has to be applied for all the people who are contributing to watchmaking wear. And think it's very important that we keep that and that everybody follows that rule and everybody accepts that we have to protect the image of with, let's say, universe of watchmaking.
What is actually on the dials of an A. Lange & Söhne watch? Made in Germany?
Yes, it's made in Germany.
Nomos as well?
Yeah, it's, Nomos Glashütte, and on the bottom you find made in Germany.
You know, it's an interesting aside. It just occurred to me. Many experts in the industry consider the quality of a Lange movement to be among the very best in the world, which includes the Swiss colleagues. For me, oftentimes when I see made in Germany on the dial, I find that more of a promise of quality than Swiss made, and that's going to be a very unpopular opinion, I understand. But experts agree that the Lange movements are among the top 2, 3 in the industry. How does Lange feel about this? You know, all the noise that gets made about Swiss made, so on and so forth.
Well, the question is asked very often between the difference between made in Germany and Swiss made, and where Lange's position in that. So I would prefer to call it made by A. Lange & Söhne, and this is the best quality seal which we can give on our watches. And I think this is also a reason why we don't have any certificates and chronometer measurements, because this is something what the brand guarantees for.
That brings me to another question I completely forgot. In Glashütte, there is actually a chronometer certification. Do either of you subscribe to this, and why or why not? Christoph?
Yeah, for us, it's really difficult to get this. We have a project with watches which fit this chronometer norm, but it's a question of the price, and it's the question of the customer will pay this price for a watch like this.
And it must be said at this point that Nomos watches are very inexpensive. It's really, honestly, in my opinion, the biggest bang for the buck out there right now. For under €1,000, you can get a manufacturer movement in a beautiful timeless watch. I'd like another company to step up and be able to do that. And if you add a chronometer certification to it, you have to pay for the certification, which gets added to the price of the watch. So that's a completely understandable point of view. What does Lange feel about chronometer certification, particularly when it's in your hometown?
Well, as said, I mean, it's a watch made by Lange, made by the brand, and I think this is a promise we are giving and a promise we are keeping, and the criteria, of course, which we are measuring in-house, following the chronometer certificates and all the rules, and our, let's say, own quality approaches that we want to be within that criteria, and of course even better. And this is something which we will be proved by the customers at the end. And I think the feedback we are getting from them is the best certificate we can have.
Lange & Söhne does something that nobody else does, and it's the fact that Lange assembles each movement twice. So this is added to the production process. Arndt, would you please tell us why Lange & Söhne goes to all that trouble to assemble the same movement twice before it gets put in a watch and sent to a customer?
Well, that's a longer story, but I think the double assembly is something which is part of our company philosophy, whereas different reasons. First of all, it helps us on a way to achieve as possible perfection, which we would like to have in the watches. And well, first of all, it is a quality control. That means if the watches are functioning already, we are completely assembled. We disassemble the whole thing. We take apart. That sounds maybe a little bit strange if you don't see what is behind, but it helps us to guarantee that also for the service later on, everything works properly, everything has been fixed already, and in the process of assembling, whereas many different steps in between of setting the heights and all the assembly, disassembly, it's actually for the whole movement a double assembly, but where's more assembly and disassemble in between the different processes of, for example, chronograph setting and adjusting and so on. But I think more important is we have a very special material we are using. It's German silver. It's it's an alloy which has been used in old Lange pocket watches as well. It's untreated, it's a natural material, and we very much love the color, which is a natural color as well. So it's not galvanized or has no rhodiumed surface. And the color darkens a little bit, which is a kind of patina, which is something we would like to achieve with the watches. And since we have a certain structure of our movements with a 3/4 plate, if there's any small scratch while we do the assembly process, the final finishing is only applied after or for the second assembly. So the total surface of a 3/4 plate, which is quite big in the movement, is completely worked over, and which gives a very, let's say, beautiful picture at the end. Since all our watches have a sapphire crystal back, and we know that our collectors and the connoisseurs love to look into the movements, not only with the eyes, but with the loupe or with a microscope even. So it has to be 100% perfect. And so this helps a lot to have that final process only in the second assembly, as well as some final finishing we do in the assembly, polishing of gold chatons, for example, or also the original Blued screws are only used in the second assembly. The first assembly, the screws are in a rotation process, so we use plain screws, but the good ones, the Blued screws, are only set and screwed in if everything fits perfectly and the watch is almost ready.
Wow, that's an interesting fact. I've never heard that one before. Which, as you were speaking, it just reminded me, there is no skeletonized movement at Lange. Could you ever imagine one appearing?
Well, say never, never. But no, it's not part so far of our strategy. Well, it looks different. We have a clearly defined picture of our movements, and where some elements which we would like to keep, and in a skeleton watch, you have to minimize the structures, the plates, and everything, and which is not part of our collection so far, and it's not intended to do that.
Christoph, I'd like to zero in a little bit with Nomos on this process of becoming a manufacturer. Can you tell us a little bit more about the transformation?
Yes, as I told you, we became manufacturer in 2005 with this automatic movement. In fact, it was just a history that our founder Roland Schwertner gave the question to Mirko Heine. Just let's do automatic movement, and he has really the free hand to design it, to make this movement. So he was just inspired by other movements, and he decided the best one for Nomos. So today we have this automatic movement really with a nice design, so you can see really the mechanical parts and the movement, and it's not really fixed on any behalf of structural or mechanical things that has to be respected. So we have this movement that fits to Nomos, and that's a nice looking movement. And from there on, from 2005, we had this integration of the date mechanism. From beginning of that, we can start to make other movements on this basis. So we learned about these processes, about the parts. We started the supplying structure, so we bought some of those parts, but in the meantime, we also bought machines. So today, as I told you, in 2010, we created this XI movement, and for us there was no question that this movement has bought parts. So last week, for example, it's just a small history of that, I went to Switzerland with Mr. Heine, and we just discussed about that we do not have this visit for the supplying companies for the XI caliber, because we did not buy any parts outside for for that reason, it was really for us easier to handle that. And if you see that the first idea of the XI movement, GMT movement, was in 2009, and the movement was in the test phases, you already had one watch, I think, in 2010, and in serial production from now on, so means from May 2011, it's really a short period to develop a huge movement. And so it was not just a process to make, okay, we want to be manufacturer at a minimum level, but also to become manufacturer in the whole content of vertical integration and to understand all the processes we need to understand for making watches.
That's enormous. I didn't realize that the developmental process for the Weltzeit, this is the World Timer watch, was so short. Several of us journalists tested the pre-series Weltzeit watch. Did this test process help you in a special way to begin the serial production?
Sure, it did. Normally it's really a test phases where we say, okay, that might be smaller problems that can occur, but in general that were really just a couple of smaller things that we can optimize. So for example, my GMT watch, it's the same, there was nothing changed and it's really working well. For that reason you see the movement was already developed when we started this test phases.
Okay. Christoph just talked a little bit about suppliers in Switzerland. Does Lange & Söhne also have any suppliers in Switzerland? And is it, if so, which I think there are just a couple maybe, is it difficult getting these supplies being so geographically distanced from Switzerland?
Well, it's not a secret that also Lange, of course, has a couple of suppliers where some parts which we get from outside. And not only from Switzerland, by the way, was also some coming from Germany. But of course, there's a big advantage with a high level of production depth that the dependence on suppliers is quite low. So it gives us the big advantage that we first of all depend on ourselves, and it was a strategy since the very beginning that we tried to increase our autonomy and we have integrated the hairspring production, for example, and other things. So with all our good examples for the way we have gone over the years, and so far I think the situation with suppliers for Lange is sometimes not easy. I would say it's even more difficult. Also, it's a small number because the quality demand of Lange is very high, and the quantity which we need is very low, and this makes it very difficult for a supplier with such critical clients as Lange. We prefer definitely to make big quantity, and nobody cares so much for how the parts look at the end. But that's the problem we have to face, and that's an eternal discussion, I would say. But so far, it's going well, and the parts we get from suppliers are perfectly fitting into the whole movement at Lange as well.
Christoph, one of the most amazing things about Nomos watches is the design, this timeless, beautiful design. It has not changed in over 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin and inspiration of this design?
Yes, inspired by the Bauhaus, or more precisely from the Werkbund, which is the small association of manufacturers in Germany, even not only the watchmaking societies. So we were inspired by this first draft. It was a Lange watch from the 1930s. So this was just a dial manufacturer which did this tryout, I would say. And we were inspired by this design, and we just optimized it for the 1990s. And after that, we made the box of it, the dial, the hands, and we tried to make this linked to the tradition. So today, the tangente, for example, it's even the same tangente as in the 1990s. Today with blue hands, temperature blue hands, with the dial which is silver coated, and the movement which is really a manufacturing movement, which is also quite interesting for that. So there we changed a bit since the 1990s, but I think the inspiration of the Bauhaus to make a clean design, to make a structured face of the watch, it's alive today, I think. So, and yeah, the success of the Tangente is still unbroken. Even you saw the GMT Tangente, it's the same face, and we try to integrate this GMT mechanism as minimalistic as possible. So you have just this 1 or 2 square millimeters of indication of the bird time, and the face of the Tangente is the same as in the 90s.
And when you add something to such a classic and timeless design, what do you have to pay attention to so that you don't destroy the proportions?
That we are known for flat watches, so for us it's also a given to respect this design rules. So for the GMT watch, I just remember you were in Glashütte and we demonstrated that. There were several ideas with a third hand or fourth hand and indication of the time zone, and after that really the design of this simple watch was the success. So we have to respect all these lines and all the small elements of the dials to make this face of a Tangente, to do not destroy this face.
I think the unbroken success, especially of the Tangente, shows that all this was definitely worth it. For those of you who don't know, they sell more than 10,000 of them every year in Germany. It's an evergreen that's amazing. Anyway, and speaking of history, Lange & Söhne, the modern incarnation, has a very large shoe to fill, a grand historical model to live up to. Does this influence the way the modern company works?
Definitely. It's a pride history, a pride tradition, and it's one of our main pillars in the philosophy of our company. Of course, it gives us inspiration in many different aspects, and it starts from the quality requirements which Ferdinand Adolf Lange has defined more than 150 years ago, which of course are also very important to us, whereas many, let's say, typical elements which you still can find in old Lange & Söhne pocket watches, which we have kept, like the three-quarter plate, like the hand-engraved balance cock, or the gold chatons and other things. It's still part within our wristwatches, but it's also an inspiration in terms of, let's say, bringing innovation. So not only relying on things from the past, but also integrating new ideas, new technical solutions, new mechanics. So whereas many examples, the big date was a big thing in the early days when Lange came back, 1994, the first collection, which was also inspired by the history from the famous 5-minute digital watch in the Semper Opera House in Dresden, but it was it gave inspiration for the outside state, which is in those days it was a first in the watch industry that such a big date was produced in a serial watch. And just 2 years ago, it also gave inspiration for the Zeitwerk with a completely new indication of time with the digital jumping numerals. Well, we called it the new face of time because it looked so different, which is more the design aspect of getting inspiration from the past, but in all aspects. And if I look into, let's say, complicated timepieces, Fusion chain I've mentioned already, or if I look into, an example, the tourbillon stop mechanism. Never before it was realized that the tourbillon, which is considered to be the most precise mechanism to keep time, but it was not possible to set it accordingly to a time signal. That means to stop it and to restart precisely. And so we found a way how it can be done in 2008, I think it was, and now it's part in our tourbillon mechanism. So always partly comes from the past, but is applied now in a would say more modern way. And well, this is all about watchmaking, but it's also if I think about the early days and how Ferdinand Adolf Lange has been starting in Glashütte with a couple of students, well, it also means a lot to us that we have started our own watchmaking school already in '97. So 3 years after the first market launch, we have started with our own, let's say, training of the young talents of the future. And this is something which all gives us inspiration, where the history means a lot to us, but it needs to be adapted in a modern world.
You reminded me just there about the typical elements of a Glashütte caliber. There are several elements that have just, it's like a golden thread that runs through the entire history of the town and its products. Christoph, what does Nomos use of these? Are there any of these typical elements in your calibers?
Yeah, sure. We have these blued screws, we have this 3/4 plate, and also a stop work, which is traditional for this pocket watches in the history of Glashütte. So we just bring these parts into those movements. So it was quite a challenge for us to integrate these characteristics into that movement, which has to be able to be a serial produced movement. So we integrated that in our way.
I think at this point we will stop the interview process and see if there are any questions from the audience that you might have on our gentleman here.
Is there an element of competition between German manufacturing and Swiss?
So he's asking if is there a competition between German and Swiss? An element of competition.
Well, for sure. I mean, at the end, the customer decides in the showroom, in the watch store, and well, I mean, our competition is, of course, in Switzerland. So we look carefully what some of our friends and also of some other brands are doing. We are within a group, so also within a group, it's definitely competition, but I think which is good for the final customer and helps everybody to move forward and to, let's say, develop new things, integrate new ideas, and competition, I think, is key of our business. Yeah.
Do you think that the German manufacturers, do you deliberately try and differentiate your products from the Swiss? I mean, obviously every manufacturer produces a different watch with different complications and so on. Do you think there's a distinction between the German style of watchmaking and the Swiss?
So it's the face of the watch is it's important for the customer to buy a watch or not buying a watch. So even if you are all kind of experts of movements and interested also in movements, that's not the majority. So I think the success of the watch would be the looking of this watch and the price relationship to the quality and to the manufactured movement. And I think in that case, there might be also a competition if you compare those watches to other watches. But 1 year ago, Nomos decided to make a flagship store just in the middle of Zurich. So we did not think that this could be a success. Like Uwe Arendt, our CEO, said, we are just bringing tea to China. So that was just a funny joke. But I think even our figures and our sailed watches show that this could be a project with success. And even at the day where we opened this shop, I met some Swiss persons there, and they said, okay, it's really interesting. The watches are looking nice, and the price relationship to the manufacturer movement, it's really good. So I think it's competitive.
Let me take a microphone. No problem.
Watches are advancing more and more. I mean, in terms of their actual technical construction. I mean, it's just beautiful to watch. But we're sitting here in a gallery. Are you finding that you're having to turn these pieces into more innovative works of art? Is there more of a onus on the design of the watch now, as opposed to just the internal structure? Do you find you're having to make it more beautiful, more original? Is the wrist not going to be enough soon? That kind of thing.
Well, I think for Lange it's definitely pieces of art which we are selling. It's first of all it's craftsmanship. So the people have learned a profession and they have their skills and they have their competence. So for the watchmakers, for the people who do the finish, for the people who do the engraving. But if you look closer, it is somehow a kind of art what is done there. And a couple of years ago we did some macro photo shoots of very tiny little elements, and we have presented it like in an art gallery, if you remember, in a very high magnification. And many people were asking, where can we buy that? We would like to put it into our wherever flat living room. It looks like art. It's a question of definition, and if you see how the people do that with what kind of passion, I think this is something what also the artist feels if he creates, let's say, a painting or a sculpture or whatever. This is what a watchmaker also does in his world.
No, I think we understand the question. I mean, for Nomos, for example, it's the motto has always been form follows function, just like Bauhaus. But I know.
The reason why our power reserve indication is at that place, because the barrel is at that place. So form follows function means for us to make it simple and indicates a function at a place which is not really typical.
But there are other manufacturers. When I think about François Pojorn, for example, he tells me that he designs the look of the watch first and then designs the caliber to go along with the look. Panerai, yeah, they don't have any difference in their appearance anyway. That was a joke. How do you see this, Arndt? How does Lange handle this?
Well, I think if you look into the details, definitely you find many things which are created to be beautiful, to follow aesthetical demands, to not only to be functional, but for Lange it's always, we need to balance between function. Of course, we are producing watches, so we need highest precision available. On the other side, we follow at the end the movement as a piece of art has to look beautiful, and in our design department we do a lot of efforts not only to make it functioning but also to make it looking beautiful. And if we talk to customers, and we do that quite often, so we celebrate the winding of our watches, we enjoy the watches. Since I said earlier, we have a sapphire case back, so you can look into the movement. We enjoy the look of a movement not only as a machine which indicates time, but also as something which touches their heart and which is very emotional to them. This is what art is doing normally.
Oh, I think time is just about up. I'd like to thank our distinguished guests here, and thank you for coming. Unfortunately, the following talk that was supposed to be given by Gerd Rüdiger Lang of Chronometer will not be taking place. Mr. Lang is ill, so he didn't come. So, thank you.
Thank you.